I'm Allie.
And I'm Becki.
We're registered dietitians that are passionate about food as medicine, and we use functional approaches to whole body health.
In today's video, we are going to be covering our top 4 tips for troubleshooting your bone broth and making both beef and chicken broth from scratch.
Yes, we have an entire gut health series, which is linked below on a playlist. You can check out the top 5 reasons why you should consume bone broth, where we highlight various amino acids, the properties of collagen and gelatin, and how bone broth can work as like a facelift to your gut, literally oopy goopy sealing and repairing leaky gut, reducing food sensitivities and inflammation, as well as serving to enhance immune health and the weight loss process.
And then we've also covered our favorite store-bought broths, what to look for if you are doing a broth that comes off the shelf, and how you can soup up your bone broth so that you can increase nutritional density and get yourself to drink more broth.
Yes, so we have bone broth 3 ways, and then an additional way that we served it when we were on tour for my anti-anxiety diet cookbook. So be sure to check out those 2 videos for sure. Now, today, we're gonna teach you 2 ways from scratch. Well, the chicken broth, we take a little bit of a cheat step using a rotisserie chicken, and we'll talk about that. But the most important starting point of making bone broth is quality bones. So for the beef bones, I have these grass-fed beef knuckle bones. So these have been cross-sectioned by the butcher. This is important because this is going to expose that marrow that we want to leach out rather than a big knuckle, which is harder to break down. So grass-fed is really important when you're looking at beef broth. And then we're looking at pasture-raised for your chicken carcass. And second to that would be organic, antibiotic-free, and hormone-free as a bare minimum.
So then if those animals haven't been raised in a pasture-centered way on feedlot, you can actually see increased levels of toxic metals in their bones, such as lead.
Right, so you want to leach out the amino acids, the gelatin, and the collagen. And so in the leaching process, you want to make sure you have a pure source so you're not leaching any of that gnarly stuff that could actually work against your health journey. So grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic is key. We want to also ensure that we roast the bones. This is going to impart more of a robust kind of caramelized flavor profile. If you do make bone broth just from throwing the raw beef bones into water, it's going to taste very sour and not have a great palate. So you do want to kind of round out the flavor by roasting. This also starts to structurally break down the bones to aid in the liberation of those amino acids, the collagen and gelatin. So with my beef bones here, this is about 3 pounds. You want about 3 to 5 pounds of beef bones. You could use marrow bones or knuckle bones, but again, if you choose knuckle bones, try to get your butcher to cross-section them and break them up for you. And I'm putting half of a teaspoon of Redmond real salt on here with some cracked black pepper. And I'm gonna pop this in the oven at 400 for 20 minutes to start to break them down. All right, so I'm going to be breaking down the rotisserie while Becki cuts some of the base vegetables. It's a mirepoix that starts a bone broth, which includes onions, celery, and carrot. And so she'll start chopping that, and I'm gonna be breaking down the rotisserie. What are some things that viewers want to think of if they're going to use a rotisserie, Becki, in the quality world?
Yeah, so you want to go for the best possible quality, either from your local co-op or from Whole Foods, going for that organic and ideally pasture-raised. And one thing to really look out for is the oils used in the roasting process. So ideally, we're not using things like soybean or canola oil on there. You're not seeing any unrecognizable ingredients. This chicken was literally just an organic chicken with salt and pepper. So that would be kind of the ideal spectrum. And you could certainly do this from a whole chicken that you roasted at home, or something that we often do in our own homes is we just save our carcasses, pull all the meat off, and keep a couple of those kind of backstocked in the freezer for when we're ready to make bone broth.
Yes. So over here, let me give you guys a little bit of visual. I am pulling the meat off of the bone. We're gonna save the meat and use this in some form of a chicken salad or maybe chicken tacos or something like that. And we're going to discard the skin in this scenario because it just won't stay as well as the meat. So we're gonna pull all of our meat aside, and then all the bones I'm gathering with some of that collagen intact and putting them on this plate, which will go into the pot. Now, Becki and I both are recovering vegans and had a couple years under our belt of veganism and definitely of vegetarianism. And I remember the first time that I made bone broth, it was a little bit interesting or creepy, I guess, to say at least. But I believe really truly that when we are eating animals, it's important that we respect the entire animal and we eat in a snout to tail approach. So that means that all of the edible parts of the animal would be consumed. This is important nutritionally as well because this ensures that you have a good balance of amino acids. If you eat just too much meat fibers like ground meat or just like the chicken breast, you're going to have higher methionine in the body, and this can be pro-inflammatory. When we do eat more of the glycine and the collagen and the gelatin, this balances out inflammatory markers like homocysteine, which can be a risk factor for cardiovascular health. So we're getting the benefit of connective tissue support when we eat the bone. We're also getting glycine, which can play a role with neuromuscular relaxation and anti-inflammatory heart healthy support.
Yes, and it totally is that connection of, getting to know your food intimately. I remember breaking down whole raw chickens when I eventually started eating meat and having to really sit with it. So
yeah.
The rotisserie is a good way to cheat that a little bit if you're not quite there, or just starting with actual chicken bones. And oftentimes I'll add feet into my chicken broth as well that I get from the local farmer's market.
Yeah, we should talk about that because the beef broth will have more collagen and gelatin. It's going to be more gelatinized. We'll see as the end of the video, you'll see it cooled in the fridge. It'll have quite a jiggle. And the chicken broth, we're going to add an extra frozen carcass into here from my freezer. And it will be somewhat gelatinous, but if we had added the feet, that's going to be a great way to boost that. So if you can get chicken feet or extra backs from your farmer's market, that'd be a great way to ramp up those nutritional benefits.
Yeah, totally creepy to see those little feet boiling in there, but definitely worth it for that jiggle factor. And then also, you may have noticed that as I was chopping up that celery, a lot of the leaves made their way in there. I'm also actually going to be adding in these carrot tops. So oftentimes Allie and I will keep a bag going in the freezer in addition to that bag for chicken carcasses for veggie scraps. So in this recipe, I'm using the whole onion skins. You'll see me putting in carrot tops and even those leafy parts of the celery. I also have not really washed these carrots super thoroughly, or peeled them at least. I've given them a quick rinse, but you're getting some extra minerals imparted from the dirt on them if they are organic or from the farmer's market carrots.
So I'm into the ribs here in the spine. So I'm gonna start to put, you can allow some connective tissue on in your broth. Again, you just don't want the skin. That's gonna create a really fatty broth. So we'll put some of that in there. Break through this part. There's some nice meat here. So of course, we're getting a good, probably 3 cups of meat off of this rotisserie. So that'll be a full family meal for sure.
I'm gonna go ahead and smash 6 cloves of garlic. And again, leaving this skin intact, no need to peel. So this makes it a little quicker, easier process.
So this is all the chicken that I pulled off of the rotisserie and I'm going to save for a future dish. So I'll put that in the fridge. And this is that extra carcass that we mentioned, a great way to create more density in there. So we'll be leaching double all of the things, the glutamine, glycine, and that collagen and gelatin, all the players. So get all those guys in there.
And so you'll notice the water is pretty much up to the top of the pot. You want to make sure that you've fully covered everything that you're putting in there. So we'll give that a little stir to fully immerse. And just to recap what's in our stock pot so far, so we've got that mirepoix that Allie talked about, which is that combination of onion, celery, and carrot. And you'll notice I just did really rough cuts on those. So quartered or eighth the onions, depending on the size, really rough chop the celery and carrots into about an inch piece. So you don't need to be precise in that way. You can just put them in as whole chunks because they're really gonna cook down in the cooking process.
Tip number 2 on best homemade bone broth is to add aromatics and food as medicine to enhance antioxidants as well as anti-inflammatory properties. So Becki is slicing some organic turmeric root. It does look a little bit like ginger at the grocery store if you've never bought it whole. You could absolutely use a tablespoon of ground turmeric as well if you cannot find the fresh root. but if you can, I think it's a fantastic add-in. We're also going to be adding in some rosemary, which is going to be fantastic for antioxidant support. We're going to throw in some bay leaves as well. And then I also will be adding in, once we get it on the water, kombu, which is a seaweed. Kombu is going to also aid with minerals like iodine to support the thyroid to further enhance the metabolism. So these add both flavor, but they're also providing a boost of nutrient density.
Yes, and you'll notice I put that turmeric in skin intact, whole, and just kind of sliced it really rough. All right, so everybody's in the pot. I'm adding now about a tablespoon of mineral-rich sea salt. This is that Redmond real salt that we love. And that makes for a really nice salty broth. I will stir that in a little bit before it goes to simmer. And then I'm adding 2 tablespoons of whole black peppercorns.
Yeah, adding that hefty amount of salt also supports the expectorant properties of broth. So broth can break up mucus and phlegm. That's one way that it can really support our ear, nose, and throat. So if we're dealing with a cold or if we're dealing with a respiratory virus, the bone broth has been shown in research to support your immune system, helping with white blood cell response, but it has cysteine in it, which is an expectorant and breaks up that mucus and phlegm. And the salt delivered with that cysteine really helps to do so.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add in that kombu that Allie mentioned. This is just adding some mineral density as well as iodine. We'll kind of break that up. And for our third tip, really, really important to make sure that you add an acid into your broth. So this is Bragg's apple cider vinegar. I'm adding about 2 tablespoons, and that aids in that leaching process of pulling the minerals and amino acids out of the bones as they're cooking.
All right, so I've just pulled the beef bones out of the oven at that 20-minute mark. They're roasting for 400 for 20 minutes. And I'm going to be taking the thyme and just spreading this here, about 10 sprigs or so of thyme. And then I'm also gonna take one of my onions and place this in my roasting pan. Also, just gonna impart a little bit more of that caramelized flavor because I will return this back to the oven for another 20 to 30 minutes or so. So this is the halfway through roasting part with the thyme and 1 quartered onion added. Okay, so I just pulled the beef bones out of the oven. They've been roasting for 50 minutes at this point, and that's been enough time to really start to break them down. So I'm just going to take my wooden spoon and kind of rub on some of the brown goodness so we make sure we get all that flavor transferred into the stock pot. And I'll use the onion to actually pick up some of that browning. That's where some of that delicious marrow is coming out of the bones. And if you really have some stick, you can actually do a pre-splash of your apple cider vinegar, and that will further liberate some of the pieces that are really stuck. There we go, now we're getting all the browning. All right, so now that I've got it nice and deglazed, I'm just going to transfer these beautiful roasted beef bones into my stock pot. I've already filled that with water, and I've put those carrot tops that Becki was talking about in there. So I'm gonna put my 3 pounds of roasted beef, and then as I'm transferring these, Becki is gonna be putting in pretty much the similar ingredients of the base of the chicken broth, that mirepoix blend. So you'll see the simple quartered onions, which have the skin intact. You'll see some roughly chopped celery and about 1.5 cups of carrots. And then I'm adding all the roasted goodness of the onions as well to get that nice Maillard browning, that caramelization of flavor. We're also going to add in, similar to the chicken bone broth, some bay leaves, a hefty amount of mineral salt. We have a full tablespoon here. So the final ingredient that I'm going to add into this beef broth is recommendation 4, to ensure that you add black peppercorns. So I cracked a pretty liberal amount of black pepper when I roasted these beef bones. And black pepper is a great way to ensure that you have optimal digestive juices. In fact, the biopurine in here can increase your hydrochloric acid. This is the stomach acid that is required to activate digestive enzymes, aiding us in the breakdown and absorption of fats and proteins. And for some people that have stagnation in their gallbladder or otherwise digestive stress, the HCl boost from the black pepper really ensures that they are absorbing the beautiful nutrients provided by the broth. So we're gonna put in a good solid tablespoon of black peppercorns as well. All right, so the chicken broth has now been going for just about 24 hours.
So you can see you've got some nice caramelization here, and the bones are actually really easy to break down. So marrow is accessible and we could literally snap them with our fingers.
Yes, now when we come over here to the beef broth, with both of your bone broths, you do want to see the viscosity or the thickness to increase throughout the cooking process.
Now with the beef, you'll note that the bones are a little bit more dense, so we actually allowed 36 hours of cooking time to really break them down versus 24 with the chicken. And you can see the bone matrix here in this knuckle bone.
Notice very different in the beef broth as opposed to the chicken is a lot more of an oily sheen at the surface. There's a lot more fat in the beef bones than we get out of the chicken broth. So the bone broth from the chicken will be easily strained, and then we'll use that broth as the end product. But for the beef broth, once we've strained it, we're going to set it in the refrigerator to allow that fat to come up to the surface. The really cool thing about this fat is this is essentially tallow, and you can use this grass-fed beef fat as a healthy cooking fat within your kitchen.
So you'll see here with the beef broth, you've got that nice gelatinous kind of jiggle factor to it where it's literally scoopable with a spoon when you've put it in the fridge. Okay, so you want to allow 1 to 2 inches from the neck of the jar for expansion, because as this liquid cools, it's going to expand about 10%, and you want to avoid breaking jars and wasting that gorgeous liquid gold bone broth. And then we want to allow the broth to cool in the fridge overnight before we transfer it to the freezer. Now, if you've broken jars before, or maybe you don't have enough glass mason jars, it would be appropriate to freeze your broth in plastic, as most of that concern would be leaching from BPA when the broth is hot. So another thing that I'll do in my household is pour the broth into ice cube trays so I can use some of that right away, easily accessible for deglazing a pan or making a sauce when I only need a small amount, versus using an entire jar and thawing it.
Slow cooker versus stovetop, Becki. Pros and cons.
So with the slow cooker, really the preference is just, I guess, safety or perceived safety in your household if you're comfortable leaving broth on overnight or if you're leaving the house. So oftentimes I'll use the slow cooker with my broth just because I'm not going to be attending to it, or if I'm going out and about. If I'm going to be home during the duration of the cooking process, I would rather do the stovetop process. I think it has a more kind of nostalgic feel. You get a little bit more of that like aromatic release in the air. But either one is totally appropriate. For the beef in the slow cooker, I'm thinking about 36 hours.
Yes.
And then chicken broth on the stovetop would be about 24.
Yes, so I actually start the slow cooker on high until it reaches a nice boil, and then I'll bring that down to a low simmer setting, and that will retain for that additional, 35 hours after an hour on high or so. And on the stovetop, what is nice is you get to kind of adjust your heat a little bit more delicately. You can taste through the process of both, and that's what I like superior to doing an Instapot, for instance, or some of those pressure cooker methods. Both Becki and I have not had success, but we're curious if you have and if that's what you prefer. In our household, we use these traditional methods. So leave a comment below on if this was helpful for you to troubleshoot your bone broth process. Again, the top 4 steps are to ensure you have quality bones and that you roast them, to ensure that you add antioxidant and anti-inflammatory flavor enhancers from your roots, herbs, seasonings, and spices, to ensure that you add an acid like apple cider vinegar to aid in that leaching and increasing that absorption and breakdown from the bones, and then the 4th step to ensure that you always add those peppercorns to aid in the digestive process.
And we'll link both of the recipes for the chicken and the beef bone broth down below so that you can play with what variation works best for you. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you can follow us through this entire gut series and always stay up to date on new food as medicine tips. Farmers market carrots.
Sorry, Blanche.
Oh my God.
Okay, sorry. Ew.